Hello and welcome. Welcome to tonight's live stream. This is Matthias 76. We are decoding the deception, and I am so happy to have you here. As you know, if you missed the live stream, you can watch it the next day, and if you've missed it, you're watching it the next day. But I do encourage you, come out on the live stream, join us here, join in conversation. We are working to build a community, and we want you to be a part of it. Well, where I want to start tonight, I've got it's another New Year's thought. And we'd had a little bit of time reflecting on the new year and how the believer approaches that and looks at that. I had another thought that I wanted to share with you, and it applies not only to the new year as we look ahead, but it also applies to all our lives as servants in Christ's kingdom. And, we're constantly under barrage. We're constantly under assault as believers for the things we hold to, the values that we hold, the beliefs that we hold dear, holding fast to the Word of God. We're constantly under assault, and it's easy to allow things to shade our perception, shape our perception in ways that aren't healthy, that aren't beneficial. And the passage I wanted to consider for just a moment tonight before we jump into the news is here in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 2. And I've always found this fascinating, Paul's comments here, and he's talking about there were struggles in Corinth. There was a lot of weird, difficult stuff that was going on. But here he's talking about his role as an apostle, his role as a teacher of the Word of God. But what he says, certainly it's at a higher level with the Apostle Paul than it is for me or for you, but it holds true for us as well. And it is a gem, a truth that serves us very well if we hold fast to it. And he says this: moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. In the end, how are we judged? What is it that matters? What is it? And that's what Paul's talking about here. What is it that God sees? We are stewards. We are stewards. Now, Paul had one stewardship. I have one. You have your stewardship of those things that God has entrusted to you. Your life, your health, your wealth, your gifts, your abilities, your faith. All of those things, we are stewards. And a steward, by definition, is someone who takes care of something that belongs to someone else. I have nothing in and of myself. Everything that I am, I have received from the Lord. That's true about gifts and abilities, health, skills, whatever that might be. It's true about spiritual gifts. It's true about absolutely everything. Families and the blessings that they are, those things are all things that we have been given, the Lord has entrusted us with them. They are not our own. Our job is to be faithful. Our task, our responsibility is to be faithful. And being faithful is something that isn't preoccupied with how the world perceives us. How the world perceives us and how things really are, meaning in the view of the Lord High God, Creator and King of Kings and Lord of Lords, how He looks at things. Our Heavenly Father can be diametrically opposed, and almost always is diametrically opposed to the way the world looks at things. The things that the world values, God the Father does not value. Oftentimes these things are called an abomination when we talk about the wealth and opulence and indulgence and all the perversion that ends up rolled up into that in this world. What does God say of those things? He says, and this is talking about the great prostitute in Revelation 17 and verse 8 and chapter 18, he says, come out of her, have nothing to do with all of that. Be separate from it. We are called to be in the world, but not of it. So if we're called to be in the world and not of it, and if God calls us to come out from all that stuff, then why would we allow ourselves to be judged? Why would we assess ourselves by the standards of this world, what the world considers success, what the world considers important? By those standards, what the world considers success, what the world considers important, by those standards, the Apostle Paul was an abject failure. Everywhere he went, he got kicked out, he got arrested, he got stoned and left for dead. Prison, trouble, riots, all of this followed him everywhere he went. Think of that. By the world standards, Paul's life was a disaster. But that's not the way Paul viewed his life. He knew who he was. He knew whose he was. He knew that he was a servant, that he was nothing but a steward, and all he cared about was being faithful. If I am faithful to the one that this world rejected, the one who came into this world, and he came to his own, and his own received him not. If I am faithful to the one who was introduced to the world by John the Baptist, that man who had nothing to do with the things of this world and went out into the wilderness and lived that life of separation from this world, if I'm emulating them, then guess what? People are going to think that I'm different, and that doesn't matter. People are going to judge me by their standards, and that doesn't matter. So if we take that and use that as, how do I approach the day? How do I look at, when I wake up tomorrow, what should be the thought that crosses my mind as the day begins? It's this: how am I going to be faithful today? What am I going to do in service to my Lord? How would he have me serve him? And if that's my question, then I need to spend some time with him. I need to spend some time in prayer. I need to be pursuing him in his word, learning his truth, having him being formed in me by taking in his word. Then I'm equipped to make better decisions throughout the day of how, in this situation, in this moment, how do I be faithful? How do I be faithful? Let that be the standard to which you hold yourself. I'm just trying to be faithful. And it's what I do in operating here within the confines of decoding the deception and proclaiming the truth and calling things out as I see them. No matter what people think of me as a result, I'm just trying to be faithful. I'm not trying to get views. I'm not trying to make money. I'm not trying to be anything. I'm simply trying to be faithful. And the interesting thing is, when I keep that thought in the center of my consciousness as I go about my work here at Decoding the Deception, a funny thing happens. I do a better job because I understand that I'm nothing but a steward who's been given this opportunity to proclaim his word and proclaim his truth. And in the course of doing that, we come across some interesting things. And, many of these things, I don't like to say things and try to do videos and include things here in the live stream simply because it's going to get views. My goal, my aim, and my intent is that I am going to try to inform people, to help people see the world for what it is, and as much as possible from a godly point of view, informed by the scriptures, to understand what's going on. Because all of these crazy things, all of the wackiness of what goes on in this world today, if we don't understand that it is spiritual warfare, then we miss the point. We're missing something. You can understand a lot about what we're going to talk about next with central banks, and this is from Zero Hedge. Central banks, losses make them buy record amounts of gold. Central banks, that every country in the world, except a few, every country in the world has a central bank, okay? And let's talk about those central banks. Ours is called the Federal Reserve, and that's two lies for the price of one. It's kind of like my friends who served in the military. They talked about meals ready to eat. That's three lies for the price of one. It's not really a meal. It's not really ready, and nobody wants to eat it. Meals ready to eat. Well, Federal Reserve is also Orwellian doublespeak. It's two lies for the price of one. It is not federal. It is a private institution that has been granted in the wee hours of the night on December 24th, 1913, granted unprecedented power to control the currency of the United States. They did it in the wee hours on Christmas Eve so that no one would know that it was happening, because no one wanted a central bank. That's why they called it the Federal Reserve. But it's not federal. It's not federal. It's a private bank. And can you guess who owns the lion's share of it? It's a private bank. And there are no reserves. There are no reserves. They print money. It's fiat currency. Fiat, kaboom. We say there's $1 trillion. Boom, there's $1 trillion. Now, there's some funky involved mechanisms that they use to, it's smoke and mirrors. It's like Houdini. It's all deception. But that's basically what happens. They say there's money, and then there is money. But now, the central banks, and I said all the world has central banks. Every nation in the world has a central bank. And if you don't have a central bank, they'll make you have a central bank. You know why Venezuela went through what they went through? Because Venezuela doesn't have and doesn't want a central bank. And if I list off the last countries in the world to adopt the central bank mechanism and give control to those people whose name sounds like a chocolate, then bad things happen to you. Let's talk Libya. Let's talk Egypt. Let's talk Iraq. Let's talk North Korea. Let's talk Iran. A couple of those still are independent and don't really have a central bank. But North Korea kind of gave in, as I understand it, to kind of have a hybrid, almost central bank, but it's like the camel's nose under the tent flap. And now, what do you hear about North Korea? Not that much. They're not the terrible, awful people they were before. Why? Because they gave in and have a central bank. The United States military exists to enforce the will of the Federal Reserve and the World Bank and all the central banks. And they're all basically owned by the same few families, primarily one. Anyway, now they are scooping up gold. I've talked about gold. I've talked about the smoke and mirrors with how gold is traded and paper is traded as though it's real gold in the COMEX, and that's a disaster, and it's something that's bound to blow up. When you hear these things and you look at all this stuff, if you really look at it with a business eye, you will see this is bound to explode. It's not going to work. It is a colossal Ponzi scheme that would make Bernie Madoff just incredibly envious. So, they're buying gold. You can read the article here. Zero Hedge. They're buying tons of gold, metric tons of gold, like 673 metric tons of gold in 1 month, and then 400 metric tons for a whole quarter. That's a lot of gold when you consider that it's denominated in ounces. Okay, these are tons. You can read the article. Probably it kind of makes my head spin. There's so many different components to it with China and blah, 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 all this other stuff. But it's all part of their knowing, because they're helping bring it about, an economic collapse of unprecedented nature. And when I say unprecedented, think Noah in the flood. That wasn't a flash flood. Okay. What is brewing is colossal, and they intend to use it to bring about a complete change. How do you get people to give up cash? How do you get people to give up gold and silver? How do you get people to give up their guns? How do you get people to give up their vehicles, individual property, where they live, move some? How do you do that? Through total catastrophe. When a total catastrophe happens and there's no food at the grocery store and there's no medicine already happening in the drugstore, and the no food thing next year is going to be far worse because all the farmers have sold and slaughtered their breeding stock because they can't afford to feed them. Next year is going to be much, much worse. But they've got the stage set for an economic collapse. Everything coming apart. And it is exactly what the Lord warns of, talking about the death of the great prostitute, the destruction of the great prostitute, who is done in and destroyed by the rulers of this world, the 10 kings, destroy her and devour her flesh at the end of chapter 17 of the book of Revelations. But part of what they want to do as part of this, because it's all about control. When you read what they say, when you hear what they say, when you look at them talking about what they intend to do and bring about, it is always about the same thing. It is about control. I always use the word sustainability to be an example of that. Sustainable. What you think sustainable is, yeah, we need to make sure there are more trees so that we have paper in the future and wood to build houses with. It needs to be sustainable. That's not what they mean. What they mean is they get to decide how much you get so it can be sustainable. And if you get it at all, and when you get it, it's always about control. And that is what central bank digital currencies are about. Here in bold print, Tyler Durden and Zero Hedge has, if central banks start issuing digital currencies, the level of purchasing power destruction of currency seen in the past 50 years will be exceedingly small compared with what can occur with unbridled central bank control. I've been going through old photos and scanning them and enhancing them and thinking about what life was like 50, 55, 60 years ago and what things cost. I went to the store today and I paid $7 for a dozen eggs. You pay $5 for a jar of mayonnaise. Okay. Since the central bank came into existence in 1913, inflation has gone through the roof. Inflation is the invisible tax that eats up your energy and your wealth and your ability to produce, and it gives it over to others. They don't suffer. You do. Okay. But once they bring this central bank digital currency that they can program and say, you can only buy so much of this, you can't buy that, you can't buy ammunition, you can only buy so much energy, you can only buy so much food based on the size of your family. It kind of sounds like Lenin and Stalin and Khrushchev and central control. It is exactly what it is. It's all about control. It's all about control. That's why they want an economic collapse so they can bring in central bank digital currency. And then the little bit that is there, they get to control. It's like mom gives you an allowance when you're a kid, but she tells you you can't spend it on bubble gum and candy. You have to spend it on these other things that are good and decent and wholesome. Okay? It's the same principle. So that's one thing. They're buying up tons of gold because they know things are going to fall apart and they want to be owning the gold when things fall apart. But it's all a mechanism whereby they can bring in the central bank digital currency. When I talk about things just being a total unsustainable Ponzi scheme, I want to take you to here, helpful websites. I've already got pulled up in a tab up there, but on my helpful website page, and I encourage people, go here, Check this out. Yes, Aaron puts up there, you'll own nothing and be happy. That is the motto of the World Economic Forum. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Sounds like Dad when he was mad at you as a kid. Make use of this. Come out here, check out the resources that are here. The one we're going to look at today, it's a good thing to go look at every now and then. I haven't looked at it for a little while, but I clicked on it today. Here it is. This is, and you just have to sit and watch this thing. The U.S. debt clock. The U.S. debt clock. Here's the U.S. national debt right now. $31,467,293,000,000 and very rapidly increasing, coming up on 500,000 and zooming right on past that. That is the current United States national debt. And you can look at all these different categories, hover over them, and it'll tell you. See, when I hover over U.S. federal budget deficit official up there at the top, it gives you the definition of that and that this is a real-time running total. You go, that's just the federal debt. It doesn't include state debt. That's on here too. It doesn't include, that's $31 trillion. I remember when America freaked out when we crossed $1 trillion. We're at $31 trillion. It was just $30 trillion last year sometime. That's how fast this is rocketing upward. And you look at this and you go, this can't go on. But then it gets worse. Look at all the different categories, what household assets are, what U.S. total national assets are $179,815,000,000,000 and change. Okay, when we're talking those numbers, what does it possibly matter? Not talking about total debt, look at the unfunded liabilities. U.S. unfunded liabilities, that includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those different things that we're promised that we will pay, are unfunded liabilities, not counting the debt we already have. Unfunded liabilities, $173 trillion. And this is just the United States. It doesn't include the rest of the world. Any accountant working for any business that had numbers approximating this, proportionally it would be different, would say this place is done. I'm not working here. I got to find somewhere else because this is going to collapse on itself. There's no way this can keep going. And that's why I put the USDebtClock.org on my helpful websites page. It's a good thing to go look at every now and then for perspective. And again, remember where we began today, it's just our job to be faithful. Should we try to make things better here with all this? Yes, but things are going to get really, really bad. And it can't, at this point, there is no way that I see that it can be stopped. And we just threw it all. Perspective. We need to be faithful. That is what is important. Now, we've looked at the debt clock. Also want to look at this. I've decided, I've made a decision. Here, you're in on this. On that helpful websites page, they're all good sites, good information, you know. Vigilant Citizen, go check that out. You want some insight into how crazy the entertainment industry is, and how perverse and what an arm of evil it is. You know, buck up, because you can only take so much of it. Go check out Vigilant Citizen. Fascinating information. You know, I've got some things like the Council on Foreign Relations roster, the Trilateral Commission's roster, who these people are. It gives you insight when you wonder, why is that guy so famous? Oh, he's a pastor who's so famous because he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. But anyway, I have decided that along with all these very good resources, I'm going to put the website for the World Economic Forum, they're on helpful websites because it's helpful. It will help you see things, what they're doing, how they operate, what they're trying to do, because they put it all out there. It's all there for you to see. It's just a question of, are we able to parse the verbiage, to decode it, decode that deception, and see it for what it is? So now, and this thing has already taken place last month up in Toronto, what governments must agree at COP15 to accelerate business action on biodiversity and nature. It was just about the climate and all the stuff about the climate. They manipulate the climate. They cause all the change. They cook up all the storms. And if you don't believe me, go to Jim Lee's Climate Viewer. Look at the stuff. They've had patents on manipulating the weather since 1947. Okay? They control the storms. They cook it up. They make it do what they want it to do. That's why there's the chemtrails in the sky all the time. Those are not contrails. They are chemtrails. They manipulate the weather and then they blame it on climate change. And it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all deception so that they can take control, create the problem, provide the solution. And this is about businesses getting involved with preserving biodiversity. And I'll say this straight up. The people who are really anybody in the World Economic Forum and at the United Nations don't care at all about the environment. They don't care about biodiversity. They don't care about any of it. They want total control. And they figure that once they've got 90% of the world's population gone and they're in charge, that they'll be able to have everything come back and everything will be pristine and beautiful and wonderful. But they put these mechanisms in place, just like the Paris Climate Treaty thing. Now it's this on biodiversity so that they can seize control. We're just going to read the intro captions, and this is their stuff. This isn't somebody else writing about it. This is the World Economic Forum, and just parse the verbiage. The UN Biodiversity COP15 in Montreal offers a once-in-a-decade opportunity to agree a Paris-style agreement for nature. Leading businesses are urging, translate forcing, they're not urging, they're forcing, policymakers at COP15 to agree, translate succumb, to ambitious, translate draconian, policies, translate tyranny, that will steer, translate strong arm, corporate action on nature. That's what they're really saying. Companies call for the adoption of strong global biodiversity framework that will enable business to contribute to a nature-positive future. A nature-positive future. Companies call for the adoption. That is, the big players, the powers that be, and the titans and kings of this world. The biggest ones stay in castles in places that you never see, and most of them never literally come out into the light of day. But the real powers that be are the Rothschilds and their ilk, and they own the central banks and control the central banks. People like J.P. Morgan worked for them. They were operatives for them. The people who formed the Federal Reserve, cooked it up in secret, all were under their control. Under them, the powers that be in this world are the titans of industry, the ones who are filthy rich. And they have, the power that Bill Gates has is insane because he made all that money. We could talk about how, but the creation that is Bill Gates made all that money, and now he has that money to manipulate and control as he sees fit. He has tremendous wealth at his disposal, and he manipulates things. They are the powers that be. The clown car of people in Washington, It's like they get elected, they all hop in a clown car, and hundreds of them pop out when it pulls up at the U.S. Capitol, simply are minions for them. Think of the little guys with blue overalls and goofy goggles who squeak and make cute sounds. That's what those guys are, okay? When Google, the CEO, and his name's escaping me, he's still the same guy, was said, hey, come and testify before Congress. And this was back when I first started this endeavor of decoding the deception. Do you know what he said? He said, no, I'll come in a few weeks when it works for me. And they all said, okay. He's the boss. They work for him, and they understand that. So when it says companies call for the adoption of a strong global biodiversity framework, it means that these powers that be are insisting upon it. And the people in Washington do exactly what they're told. And if this thing needs an okay from the Senate, they'll rubber stamp it and say, yes, all in the name of biodiversity, while at the same time they're spraying toxins in the sky to control the weather and pollute all the water. Companies call for the adoption of a strong global biodiversity framework, translate a method of totalitarian control that will enable business to fund, that will enable business to fund, contribute to a nature-positive future. Doesn't that sound good? Won't all the kids at school think that that's a great idea, a nature-positive future, while they're the ones using 5G and chemicals everywhere to wipe out all the wildlife, to eradicate biodiversity, to plunder the resources of the world to enhance their own well-being. But they use these in technocracy, and that's what we exist in. It is a technocracy. It is not a democracy. It's not a republic. It is a technocracy, meaning that it is engineered. The system of governance is engineered by those people who are worthy of having that power, those who are smart enough to figure it out. That's what technocracy is. And they use these public-private partnerships to get done what they want done, to fund it. And then the government is cooperating with blah, 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 and they give some money and the government pumps a whole bunch more money in, and it doesn't matter how much money they pump into it because this is going on. They just create more. It's insanity. But eventually, this system of financial madness, a house of imaginary financial cards, is going to collapse. What won't collapse, what will not collapse, is their totalitarian control over everything. And Klaus Schwab, if he is still here, or his number one lackey, Yuval Noah Harari, who calls us useless eaters, they will smile, because then it will be true that you will own nothing and you'll be happy, because they will tell you to be happy, because if you're not happy, you won't get your bowl of gruel and a mini house, stack and pack, to live in. That's what they have in mind. Now, with all that being said, it is important to remember that we serve the God Most High, Lord Almighty. He knows their plans. He knows their schemes. He laughs at their schemes because Jesus already won, and the final victory will be his. It is the theme of the book of Revelation. Jesus always wins. Why do we spend this time? I'll just speak for myself. Why do I spend this time talking about these horrible, awful, miserable things? Because Jesus' first warning to his disciples, when they asked, when is this all going to come to be? The end of all things. The first thing he said, he didn't answer their question immediately. He said, see that you are not deceived. See that you are not deceived. We have to watch. We need to be watchmen standing on the wall, pointing out the danger, so that others are warned. All of them, not all of them will listen. Perhaps most of them won't listen. But in the end, on the last day, and if you go to my About page, I encourage you to go. If you wonder who I am, what we're about, what we're doing. That's not me. He's in my intro opening thing for the live stream. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. That's from a guy who was a German Lutheran pastor. He was in the United States when Hitler took power, and he saw what was happening to his Christian community in Germany. He was teaching here in university, and he went back. He went back because he had to shepherd his flock, and he died. He died as a result of that. But I love this picture down here. I like to think that's you. I like to think that's me, that we're standing on the wall and we're watching so that we can warn others. We can warn others, and we're empowered to do that because the power of the Spirit is at work in us, and it enables us to do that thing I talked about at the beginning. It enables us to be faithful. To be faithful. Things may be hard in the meanwhile, but on that theme of being faithful, we'll go and look at Revelation 2:10, and there he's talking. This is a letter to the church in Smyrna. He said, do not fear what you were about to suffer. Do not fear. When you look at all this stuff, do not fear what you were about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, that you may be tested for 10 days. It means it was going to be unpleasant, but there was an end to it. You will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. When we are faithful, when we have that perspective, we do so with confidence, we do so with joy, because we know the reward that is already ours, because Christ has already won. Hey, I thank you for listening. I pray that this is a blessing. I pray that you share the word about what we're doing so that we can reach others, help others, encourage others, build them up, tell them about what we do here at Decoding the Deception. And I really, as I do this, I am trying to build a community and have here a partnership that we're doing this together. And I always talk in the plural. We are decoding the deception, right? I encourage you to prayerfully consider, and I'm not going to tell you to support this ministry. I'm not going to say you should support this ministry. I don't know, but I do encourage you to prayerfully consider if the Lord would lead you to support this ministry. The more support we get, the more we can do, the more work we can do. There's so much to be done, but you can go here on our webpage to financial support. Right here, you can go to our Patreon page and become a patron. All kinds of different levels you can sign up for to support this ministry. Prayerfully consider doing so. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.